Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Make yourself comfortable. We recommend getting a drink and headphones. Yes, headphones are essential. The first rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. The second rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. This flight will never stop. Welcome to Flight Club. Welcome to Flight Club. This flight will never stop.
Flight Club. Flight Club. Flight Club. Flight Club.
Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Make yourself comfortable. We recommend getting a drink and headphones. Yes, headphones are essential. The first rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. The second rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. This flight will never stop. This flight will never stop. Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Welcome to Flight Club. This flight will never stop.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold, and yeah, I'm the co-host of this Christmas show here. It's not long until Christmas, and yeah, co-host means there's a second person, which is Cliff. Cliff, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Good evening and welcome, everyone. As Klaus says, this is our Christmas or right before Christmas episode. I had a Christmas hat here. I'll have to find it in a second. But I had a Christmas hat that I was planning to wear for this episode and mess up my fantastic hairdo. So maybe we'll try that out a bit later. Anyway, good evening and welcome to everybody on the live stream. It's super cool to have you all with us this evening. Tonight's guest, we have Alexander Krause, who is joining us. And we are going to be talking about using invitation as an alternative to leading with authority. Alex, would you like to say how's it to everybody and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, actually, hi, I'm very happy to be here as we have like major problems like in companies and there are so good alternatives. So I'm really happy to be talking with you tonight about how to find the right people, how to ask people if they want to be part of something great, and how to stop pushing what we like have like deep in our DNA from the industrial age.
Yeah, excellent. So maybe if this is a lyric for a new song, the next version, hey, Klaus. Cool. Anyway, we will come back to the topic in a few minutes. I just want to spend a few minutes and greet everybody. I see that there are folks saying from all over the world. We have people joining from the UK, Portugal, from Vienna, many folks from all over the world. It is really wonderful to have you all joining us. Thank you so much for being here. Of course, a quick reminder, YouTube tells me that about 30% of you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. That means that 70% have as yet not clicked the subscribe button. So if you enjoy our content, please hit the subscribe button and also the like button on this particular video. YouTube uses this to make recommendations to you about future content and also tells other people who may be interested what is worth watching. And that would really help us out if you can do both of those. Cool. So let's go back to the topic that we're talking about today. So we've invited Alex to join us today. And the idea is that we want to talk a little bit about using invitation and pull as an alternative to leading with authority. Now, I want to kind of frame this a little bit, because I think what's interesting here is not so much that we're saying that authority is fundamentally always wrong. It's more just a case of a little bit like, we have a hammer and so we look for a nail. If we only have a hammer, we assume that everything requires, the same approach. And what we want to try to explore is this idea of what are some of the other options and alternatives that you could use. So, Alex, maybe if I can ask a first question to you, actually, given this kind of framing of, how do we avoid just being people running around with a hammer and whacking all the nails on the head, so to speak, using authority all the time? What are some of the other options that we could try as an alternative?
Okay, like first of all, authority is not bad. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. The problem we are facing is that it is centralized on like top positions of companies, and the question is like not how to lead somehow without authority. The question is more like how to distribute and how to decentralize authority so that it becomes like fluid and that people can take, or that actually leadership can emerge where it is needed, and that like decisions can be made where the information and the experts are. That is like what I think we should be aiming for. And when you say like, or like how you framed it, like in the beginning, it is more that how to like not overvalue the leadership that comes from the hierarchy, and how to maybe make that leadership that emerges from value creation, how to make that much stronger. That actually is the question. And their invitations can help. Oh, wow, what a nice hat.
I got all Christmassy. My wife brought me the hat while I was watching, so the costume changed. Now we're fully ready for the show. So yeah, this is good. Cool. I really like this because I think what I see so often in organizations is we do exactly that. And I, as a leader myself, I've been guilty of doing the same thing. Is you kind of assume that you have a responsibility, or I don't know how many of you have heard this saying of like, yeah, I want to get that promotion or that role or that seniority, that kind of sort of hat to put on, ironically, given the hat that I'm wearing now. But I want to be able to wear that hat because then, it's much easier to kind of make the changes because people sort of respect the authority. And I think this is the thing, is that we haven't so much really learned some of the other ways that we can lead without having kind of folks looking to us because, you're a director of something or a
Yeah.
VP of something or you're whatever title of something. So yeah, I think this is really, it's an important one to explore. So what should we let lead in instead? If we're saying we don't want the authority to be the leadership or leading from authority, what can we use?
Actually, we need the authority. I want to like show you one of the principles like that is like not very well known. I put it on a woo, yay. So it says actually like why and who over what and how. And we are pretty good now starting to explain about the why, but we are not good at finding the right people. We still like tell people about the what and how and what to do. Like in management, we separated this thinking and doing. There are like leaders telling others how to do things. And now, like the world, I'm not sure if it became really more complex or whatever. The thing is more that like the easy stuff, the only complicated stuff nowadays is automized, as machines became like cheaper than slaves. So that's why we are not using humans or brains to do this work. We are using machines. We digitalize and whatever. So what's left over for us, the tasks to deliver, are more the tasks of complex problem solutions. And therefore, actually, we have to find the right brains, the willing people. And if we now stop pushing like tasks on people and start inviting, like saying, look, this is the problem we want to solve. And by invitation, we can hand over some of our authority. This is not only the responsibility you get, this is also the authority you get. You are allowed to take decisions. You are allowed like to use budget or whatever. You are allowed to reduce like your workload of the daily business so that you have like time to deliver something else, whatever. And this all can be included in an invitation. And if we ask people, and if people say yes, then actually they bring motivation, they bring engagement. We don't have like any problems around all that. We do not need to motivate people. And the most important thing is about invitations is accept a no, because that no in the first place is only data. And now the question is, what are we doing with that data? Do we start blaming the others? Oh, they're stupid, they don't understand. Or do we think like, can we like change our invitation or ask why people could not say yes to our invitation? And that is a total game changer in companies and everywhere else, also in families, in school, wherever.
Sure. Yeah, I get this one a lot because often when I've done talks about my prior experience, working at Spotify and so on, people sort of say, "Oh, well, that sounds really nice. I can imagine that at Spotify it's really easy. People don't resist changes and all of this kind of stuff." And I think it's quite interesting, is because what for me is hidden inside this is sort of an assumption that basically the folks that we have inside our company are either the wrong people, or they're just not suited, or they're maybe not kind of capable of making the change. And I've joked a couple of times before, and I use this quote. I like it. It says basically, if you're assuming that there's dead wood inside your company, there's really only two ways that it got there. Is either that you hired dead wood, or, which is the more likely one, that you hired live wood and then killed it. And I think the challenge is that very often inside the organization, what we're doing basically is we're actually hiring people who are super motivated and excited to do things, and capable and smart and engaged in what they're doing. But the challenge is that then, by not actually giving them any way to kind of engage in a meaningful way, we end up actually excluding them and not giving them a space to be able to do their stuff. So I really like this concept of invitation. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on, when you talk about invitation, you gave sort of one example, but could you give us a couple of examples maybe of, how would you use invitation or what's important about invitation specifically?
Okay, we know like the very like big approaches that are using it like really in an extreme way, open space technology. This is like open space agility or open space beta. And this is like the top sponsor telling about a problem, handing over authority to like everyone, inviting everyone in the company to solve that problem. And then really people have the authority to change the system. So this is what you say, like people do not resist change. They just resist being changed. If it's pushed like from above, then you get resistance. And like this is one of the problem. That's one of the big failures we do in agile transformation. We still push. We did not get out of that pushing. So we push people in rooms and say, no, you're a team. And no one of them decided for it. We push like Scrum or Kanban on them, and no one of them like decided, yeah, this is something that really makes sense here in our environment or whatever. So as long as we use like command and control patterns and try to manage the change in an industrial way, we will fail in all these agile transformations. And I can give you like one example. There's something I'm doing right now, and this is a real cool approach. I was like really surprised by a very big company of doing that. They said like, okay, we understood something. We cannot like roll out one flavor of agility to the whole company. So the first thing they said is we're going to start like in the headquarters, so people believe that we really mean it. The second thing is they said like, okay, we understood that actually each unit, each cell, each function or whatever needs to develop like its own flavor of agility. So we tell them why it is important to do this change somehow in that direction, why it makes sense for us. And then they said, we're going to invite you to playbook teams. So some of the people within a unit are invited to create the new work mode of the whole unit. And it's not that they say like, you are invited, you are invited, you are invited. No, they said like, everyone is invited. We need at least one team who's doing it. If there is enough people saying yes, then we're going to have like 2 teams. So these are the playbook teams. And the playbook is some kind of set of rules, goals, and principles, what they want to start with to explore like that new work mode with everyone. And that is very powerful, because within that invitation was also like, okay, you can talk to your colleagues and you can see like how to reduce your workload so that you have at least 1 day per week to work on that playbook. Then they said like, you're going to go in teams. If you say yes, then you're going to do some teamwork and you're going to explore the deliveries in some kind of Scrum mode so that you like gain experience in time boxing, in reflection, in presenting or whatever, all that, and in the different roles. And that you can say like, okay, then we're going to take some of that and put it like to our future work mode. And in the reviews, you're going to present that to your colleagues, and your colleagues are going to be like your customers. So this is quite interesting because they could opt in. And now we only have like the really motivated people that really want it in these playbook teams, for example.
Yeah, I like that. I think that idea of if you use an invitation, you said it earlier that one of the important things is that you need to be able to accept and know, or at least some kind of alternative with it. And I think so often we just sort of, I think at some level, maybe we assume that now because I'm director of X or CEO of Y, that now somehow I get to decide. And I think part of the challenge maybe for some people is that we're used to group use of these is not making decisions like at all. So you end up with uncertainty.
Yeah.
But the underlying assumption that somehow because I get paid more, that my idea is better or worth more, and so we just kind of defer to that person all the time. It definitely creates some challenges. And I think, I mean, we used to talk about this quite a lot at Spotify, and the CEO even used to say, I'm not the smartest person in the room. I've hired several thousand other people who are much smarter than me at the things that they are smart at, and probably some things I don't even know that they're smart at. Why would I then tell them all the time what to do? Surely they should be telling us what we should be doing. And so, obviously there's some boundaries and stuff in this, but I think it's good to at least have as a mental framing to kind of not assume that, okay, you're the boss, therefore everything you say must be true and must go. Is definitely an important thing to explore. Klaus, I think you were going to add something.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious, just asking a question. So I can imagine that many people can somehow imagine how this works, like on a team scale or on a multiple team scale. But how does this work, like on a strategy scale? Like, for instance, Spotify. I don't know I don't know the Spotify strategy or something like this. But are there 2,000 people participating in a strategy workshop, and then we take together the decision? Because like strategic decisions is really like, okay, where do we see us in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, something like this? How is this being handled in an environment like this?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think the way that I framed it is I use an example of, say, like a restructure inside one of the tribes that I worked with. The decision that there was needing to be some restructure was something that was discussed with everyone. And I think rather than just suddenly being announced, here's now the new structure, this is who you report to, that's what you work on. There was a thing of like, we know we've run into some challenges. Some of the teams are too big. Some of them are maybe too small. We need to shift a few things around. But the sort of the decision to actually move forward with this was made by the leadership of that area, but communicated in a way that everybody else could at least give some influence in. And then following from that, it now becomes a question of like, okay, so how should we organize? And it's not that we're just trying to say, well, you all figure it out in a completely self-organizing fashion, but we use elements of self-organizing activities to be able to figure it out. So there might be some sort of discussion, like Alex was saying, you pick a few people or you invite a few people to join in and say, okay, some folks who have technical backgrounds, some maybe from product design, whatever, let's figure out what is the general kind of shape that the organization should look like before we decide who's in what team. Then we can show that to the rest of the organization and say, well, what do you think? What do you see? And somebody goes, well, I think you've mixed that thing is kind of unclear because those two things are actually separate. I'm worried that this piece won't get focus if we don't put it in a separate team, something like this. And so we can have some kind of conversation about it. And the point is that what I always advise people to do in this is if you're wanting to invite people to give input on something, you need to show them the thing before it's finished. And that doesn't mean when it's like the 99% finished thing, like the earlier you show it to them, the better it is, so that they can also have some time to think about it. Sure. Because otherwise the experience is that I'm showing you something I've spent 6 months thinking about, and I'm asking you for deep, reasoned, considered thought when you've had 5 minutes to look at my presentation. And that just doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. We want to show it to you and say, okay, cool. But it also makes it more likely that I will actually take on some of your feedback if it's not yet finished. And so this kind of iterative process of, here's a proposal, what do you think? Here's a proposal, okay, we tweak it, we update it. And it's these sort of things are a little bit messy, I think. Like people worry that, oh, but what about our governance and our defined processes and stuff? Like, sure, but also building interesting things doesn't follow a linear process. Like there's some fuzzy edges and there's some messy things. So I don't know if that kind of answered the question that you were thinking, but I think, Alex, you were going to say something.
It was, I was, there was like one thing that resonated. There was like, you were saying like, you pick a few people. And then you said like, oh, you invite, or you can invite some people. And that's exactly like what it is all about. Like we have to differentiate between like complicated and complex. Okay, complicated stuff can be managed and complex stuff actually can't. And if you go for picking some people, then actually you do it as a manager or as someone with authority. And then actually the trouble starts. Because like putting people in a room and making them collaborate like is a complex thing. Whenever like something living is involved, it's always going to be like full of uncertainty and surprises. And we humans, we are living somehow. So that means if you, from a management perspective, pick people to do something, then actually you are going for a bad decision. Because like if the people could choose themselves, they could go for a much better decision. And if you stick to picking people, then actually you as a manager become like the bottleneck, and you're doing harm as you try actually to manage complex things.
Yeah.
And then we come to the point, why not go for some self-selection mode if we want to have teams? So let them know, like, why do we need it? What kind of skills do we think of? And say, like, but I don't know, like, whom you want to work with. It says, like, create teams around, like, interesting challenges and interesting people or whatever. And giving people the chance to say, yes, I want to work, like, on this solution, or I want to work with these persons, whatever. And then following this will create, like, lots of motivation. And it will like lower your workload as a manager.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important aspect of it. It's not just that you're sort of doing it for feel-good reasons. It's actually practically better, because usually my experience, at least, is that the folks who are kind of closest to the work can make the best decision about how to deal with the thing that they're facing. But it's also the fact that, as you said, like this kind of process of escalation or bringing in somebody else, it takes a long time. If you imagine, like, I don't always like to use military examples, but I think it makes sense in this context, is that people kind of think of the military talks about command and control, but command and control doesn't mean that you imagine like a little person sitting on my shoulder while I'm aiming the gun and trying to decide, do I shoot left or right, and going, no, 2 degrees left. Okay, now pull the trigger. Like if that's the situation, you would literally be dead. And I think that the thing that people misunderstand is that there's actually quite a lot of scope for kind of providing a directional constraint or some kind of pointing in a certain space. And that's really how you need to manage effectively in complexity. So I want to actually jump across to some questions from the audience, but I just wanted to remind you, so as Klaus said, and it's in the song, it says, the first rule about Flight Club is to talk about Flight Club. The second rule is obviously also to talk about Flight Club, because, we need to stick with the theme. If there was a third rule, I think the third rule would be that you ask questions at Flight Club. So just a reminder, ask questions.
Yeah, you're invited to ask.
Yes.
Yeah. If you have questions, just type them in the chat. We'll weave them into the conversation as we go. So with that in mind, I want to actually take a question. Florian is asking, he's saying, why and how over what and who is influenced by Gerard Wohlen's work, and how best to view and deal with complexity. I'm curious what your thoughts or response to that question and comment would be.
Yeah, actually, it is influenced by the Taylor Club. And if you listen to Gerhard Wohland, then it is about like finding the right people in complexity. And I believe that invitation is actually like the best technology we have at the moment to do that. Because like as Wohland says, it's like nobody knows if you are or have the talent to solve this complex problem, or if you want that. And if you ask people theoretically, would you like to be something or not, or then it doesn't work. But if you are in that situation and it's a real decision, then actually your gut feeling will tell you, like, is this something I want to be part of or not? So does it answer that question a little bit? Yeah, it's inspired. And the problem we are having at the moment is that, like, most of the people in the Agile community still think only about that why, what, and how. They are missing the who. And like right after the why, actually there is that who we need to answer. And we are doing that until now by pushing, selecting people. And now we could switch actually to inviting people, and we will see that these are fantastic results.
Yeah. I really like this. An interesting question as well from Paul. I think it's Paul. It says, using the Cynefin model, if you are in chaos, would authority be more appropriate? And I think I don't know how many people on the chat at least are familiar with the Cynefin model, but I think there's a couple of interesting things in that, and that's basically that at a broad sense, it's saying like if there is a simple and obvious answer to something, there might be a certain type of approach that makes sense. Whereas if we need to, some contexts we need to pull in experts, in others we need to figure out the response, and in others maybe we just need to take action. So I'm curious, what would you say to this question? Is there a context where the authority is more appropriate?
Ways antias or so the first thing is I struggle a little bit with chaos. I never understood like how to define that actually, and how to separate that from complexity or whatever in these models. So what I believe is when we are in a complex environment and let it be like feel chaotic or whatever, then actually you also said like, oh, we might need experts or whatever, or we might need to go for iterative approaches. And yes, of course, because then learning is your work. Then like you need to produce as much failures as possible, like to find out the one thing that might work in that situation. And this is actually something you cannot like hand over to machines, as they do not have like ideas, and they do not have like mastery in things. And expertise is actually nothing else than mastery. So that means that knowledge, if you have like some kind of knowledge and you train it long enough, then you gain some kind of mastery to use it in a creative way. And this is what we need in complex environments actually to solve problems. We need ideas and we need mastery to solve it.
Yeah, I think if I want to just sort of tie it back to the question, I think what's interesting is that very often what happens is we find ourselves in a chaos situation. A good example of this is, say, like a house fire, or COVID-19 is a good example. We have some kind of chaotic situation, something that's unexpected, and the cost of not responding to it would be quite high. I take a house fire as example. Like if the building is on fire, you don't really want to then be figuring out who's in charge and who's making decisions and so on. And so the point is that if you know that you're going to face these situations on a regular basis, I think what's helpful is to at least be clear on, in the scenario, who does make decisions, or how do we handle, what's the protocol? And so, connecting it back to sort of military examples, but also in examples of, teams who work in highly volatile, highly chaotic situations, there usually is some kind of clear, I don't know if chain of command is kind of the right way, but it's if we need a fast decision, we don't want to be humming and hawing about it and kind of, well, is it the best option to go in and help that kid who's in the fire? Well, no, somebody should just go, or somebody should say, no, the building's on fire, I'm not risking anyone else's life. And so having like that kind of thing as a framing, I think is helpful.
Yeah.
But
this is like taking
knowing
authority. Yeah. And of course, like the a house on fire is an extreme example, but of course, like you could say, like in a situation like that, like should kids go and ask their parents if they are allowed, if they have the authority to leave the house, or should like kids just take this authority, or should like kids just have that authority to run out of the house when it is burning? So this is like more about that, like where do you put that authority, whom do you offer it, or can it be like that fluid that you can just like grab it if it is needed? Someone running into the house and pulling out a kid would not wait to ask like the fire department, am I allowed to go in there and rescue that kid? So that's
I would just bring in a question which somehow totally fits to what we were just talking about, which is Heleno Alves is asking, like, sometimes invitation and democratic processes take a time and you don't give the best result there's not the best result that as an outcome. Do you have any advice on how to overcome it? I mean, it goes a little bit into the direction we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, actually, when we talk about democracy, there's sometimes some kind of misunderstanding, as we only think of voting. And of course, the majority vote does not have to be like the best solution or the best decision. But democracy is actually, there are like different voting systems also in democracy. I'm not an expert on democracy, but actually it's about like, where is the authority? And the idea of authority is that like the authority lies within the hands of the people and not within the hands of an emperor, a dictator, a monarchist, or whatever. That is like the main idea of democracy as I know it at the moment. So it's not about voting, it's about like who has the authority. And of course, if you think about a state, like the people should have the authority, you could also think of companies, like how can all the employees have the authority to do the right things? And what do they need for that? What kind of transparency do they need for that to really like fulfill the needs of the company?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because very often what I find is when we talk about these kind of things, they're slightly sort of I don't know if polarizing topics is kind of the right way to say it, but very often like people either think that like you either have democracy or you have socialism or you have a dictatorship. It's very much like far to the extreme sort of end.
Good point.
And I think what's interesting is there's a couple of things. Is that partly it can be that it's not just one or the other. It can actually be a blend of some of those things. And the other part is that if you think about it in the sense of a company setting, there are sort of layers to it. And for me, this is a little bit of like, if you map it to flight levels and you think about the different layers, the type of decisions that are being made at each level make sense, right? It makes sense that somebody who's spending all of their time thinking about strategy and the long-term future of the company is probably better suited to make a decision about, should we bet on launching in Japan or building a fundamentally new product? But that same person is probably terrible to make a decision about how to technically implement the detail of what we're doing inside this one particular team. The same thing is the converse, is that the person who's working as the individual, the technical expert, building a vaccine or building some sort of, scientific research inside an individual team, they know very detailed stuff about what they're doing, but maybe don't have the context for some of the other stuff. And so I think it's a little bit about, maybe like layers, but also using a multifaceted approach. You don't necessarily have to do everything with a dictatorship or everything with democracy. You can say, well, this is the type of thing, and we're working at the right appropriate layer. So it makes sense that those people decide, but in this situation, we ask for input and feedback from people. And so we can use kind of a multifaceted approach, which I think is really what I've seen work more effectively than just yeah, I think we get hung up on this thing of absolutes. It's either always this way or always that way, and it's very rare that the world works
That's
out
true.
like this in my experience. There's so much nuance. Yeah.
Actually, when talking about flight levels, I think this is it has like the potential to be an idea of like a decision making, how to make decisions also across the whole company. And of course, you can invite to each level, and these levels they remind a little bit of hierarchy. And I think there is the danger of running them like command and control and top down or whatever, but it has like the potential to really like be owned by everyone. So let's say like if we think about like level 1, each function, each cell, each team, each unit like can have the authority to develop its individual like flavor of self-organization, what kind they want to use. And if this operational foundation of the company then starts building the flight level 2 and really owning it and really having ownership about like the value streams and organizing themselves in a self-organized way, it's the flight level 2 is just wonderful to talk about like how to allocate resources or whatever. But of course, these resources can do that themselves. So they see like, where is work coming from and where is work going to? And
Yeah.
they can like start talking about that and organize themselves around actually the work and make the deliveries and the results flow through the company. And
Yeah.
that's just wonderful. And the great chance is like to have everything attached actually to the strategy. So that means you know about the why. It's that unbroken chain of why that you see like this is attached somehow to the strategy. That's somehow important to our company and important to myself, maybe important to society or whatever. That means like people everywhere in the company know why they are doing things. And now I'm like pulling out this again. That means like if they know why, and if they are allowed to coordinate themselves around value creation, then they can answer
Yeah.
the who themselves. And
Yeah.
then I believe, like, I haven't seen that like this, but I believe there is the magic in it.
But I think
Yeah.
I really love how you explain it, because I think the whole spirit about flight levels, at least where it actually came from, it was always like a bottom up kind of thing. So it's like you have the teams in flight level 1, and you come to the conclusion that these teams, they always need to coordinate with each other. So it's always like, I'm waiting for you, I'm waiting for you. So we as the teams who need to coordinate, we talk to each other and we are like, well, shouldn't we build a system where we can like a room? Can we build a room of conversation, like where we can have this conversation? So who's blocking whom? So the point is, the teams, they are building the flight level 2 system. So there is no flight level 2 manager or something like this. But then the teams often are like, the product. So this is something like a product or a system, a service board. Maybe they have again dependencies and they need to coordinate. So they decide to build something like an operational portfolio. And maybe the flight level 2s are like, oh, and what about strategy? Are we running in the right direction? So let's build a strategy board. So the idea is always like, you do it from the bottom upwards, and in flight levels, you won't see a single line about like hierarchy or like managers have to own this level or that level. So it's totally and it's we're not talking about this actually, if this somehow makes sense. And this is something like which is sometimes I guess misunderstood, but to a certain extent it's also okay that it's misunderstood. So for instance, when we build a flight level, like a flight level's work systems topology, we never build it like in a hierarchical way. We always build it from the left to the right. Yeah, so we somehow try to get rid of this hierarchy in there. Although it's somehow a little bit seducing to old economy managers, because they could somehow see them somewhere in this poster, like I'm more the flight level 2 guy, I'm more the flight level 3 guy, and this most of the time opens the door for a conversation, which is actually not too bad. So we don't shoot you in the face like, okay, everything what you're doing is wrong. It's like, okay, I invite you, talking about invitation, for to a conversation, if this somehow makes sense. So that's somehow the spirit of flight levels.
Yeah, I call that dialogue instead of monologues, feedback, or whatever. That is like quite wonderful, because with flight levels you have a visualization about what matters actually, and you also say like create the level 2 like it should be and not like it is at the moment. And if like the operations really own that and are allowed like to do what makes sense, then it's just great. So flight levels is not only for decision making, it's also for like dialogue about what matters across the whole company. And of course you can like add authority wherever you want and wherever it makes sense, and allow people just to decide more, because that's actually what helps to get faster, to decentralize actually the authority. And I see like Jan was asking like examples where you managed to create an environment where other pull authority. Actually, authority needs to be offered, as we have like a company at the moment where it is centralized. And therefore, as we have these points of central authority, these points have to want it. They have to want it and have to offer it. So we are not at that point where you can just pull any authority you want, but you can offer this authority. And of course, you can also put it into like habits, rituals, or whatever. Like looking at Scrum, if you have a retrospective, of course, you define like what is our playground? What do we have under our control? What do we have the authority for? And within that playground, we can decide for changes. And if we need someone else, then we like have to ask, can we pull your authority? Or in the best case, these people say, whenever you need my authority, just ask me, and then I will see how it feels to offer it to you. And the good thing about that is actually that managers do not have to be afraid to lose their powers. So that means like in classical organizations, that power and that authority sticks to the manager, even if he hands that over to someone else for a time box or whatever. Because if you say, this is the problem we want to solve, this is the reason why we need to do it, this is the responsibility, and this is the authority I'm going to give you, and who wants to be part of that? After the problem is solved, that authority comes back to that manager, and he can like distribute that again. And sometimes we also have like settings where like authority is given and people just can take it. For example, if you go for some self-selection process to find new teams, then everyone like has the authority to speak up and to find like the right team members for him or her.
I think it makes sense if we're bringing in Björn's question now, because I mean we are already on the track like with managers, and I think it would we could go a little bit deeper here. So Björn, by the way, hi, is asking what do you tell established managers in large organizations about invitation and pull? So the what's in it for me question, kind of. What do you think about that?
Brownfield approach about invitation and pull. What's in for me to go that way? Yeah, actually,
why shall I do it?
Actually, you cannot convince people. You cannot convince managers. Actually, you couldn't just help them to gain insights. So if they are willing to invest in learning, and learning is always an investment of time and money. If they are not willing to spend time or money or whatever, then they are not willing to learn actually, or there are some like other things that prevent them from doing it. It's like they need to start daring to invite. No, actually, they need to have that insight that they are becoming a bottleneck. This is what we are experiencing at the moment. This is why the companies get so slow, because management became the bottleneck and the highest risk of these companies. If you have that centralized authority and you like each decision needs to get like all that way up, and then you need to explain it to people in super cool PowerPoints, and these people actually have no clue, but have the authority and must decide, then they need to ask others, but they don't have time, their calendar is filled, and then it takes like half a year to get that decision. If you would have like centralized that authority and the decision could have like been made where the information and the experts are, then you would be like much faster. And that is actually, I think, one of the major insights, that first you have to see, okay, as a manager with centralized authority, I am becoming a bottleneck here, and this is going to be a risk. And if I like distribute my authority by invitation, then just the right people might get it, and then I would like have time to do like some other real cool stuff that is helpful for that company.
I've often said to folks that, because I think we're a little bit of what's behind that sort of struggling to step back and kind of leave space for others is often a fear that, you know, my role will be sort of replaced and I won't be needed. And I've kind of joked to a few people and said basically that I think the challenge with this is that yes, at some level, like if you're really stuck in your job, you can't be replaced, but it also means that you can't be promoted or ever do anything different either. And so the challenge is that, like, if you're always the bottleneck, you're always the go-to person, that means you're going to stay in that space. And so what I've often found helpful is specifically working with folks like, say, tribe leadership or that sort of director level and that sort of level, helping people to say, well, what are the things that are in your head that we could put on the level 2 system and basically visualize that so that everybody else can see and get involved. And one of the things that is really important for me in all of this is that there was a question earlier, I think Jan was asking about, you know, examples of how you can create pull. For me, one of the things that's super important in this space is to say, well, if we're making changes in the organization, put that stuff on the board, visualize it as well, because that work is something that we want others to be involved in. And so if we're saying, yeah, we were introducing metrics or we're trying to, I don't know, get better at how we handle technical debt or whatever it is, there's some decision that's made, put that on the board and invite others. It creates, I think the level 2 system explicitly creates that invitation for others to be able to say, actually, I'm seeing that as an opportunity to get involved in this thing. Maybe I'm going to not do the other thing that I was thinking about before. And so we can have a conversation about that. But also what we can do is we can look at it, we can go, wow, we're basically being invited to do everything. And so boiling the ocean is probably not the right place to start. Maybe we could pick 1 or 2 of the invitations and go to a few things first and kind of have that conversation. So I think it's kind of making the invitation visible and open to people is a huge part of what's helpful.
There cannot be enough transparency, actually. Actually, you cannot have like enough of transparency. I got like something Ivana said also. Where is it? Oh yeah, here. I have like the board of some things I should remember, and it says lower transparency ensures you hide stuff. So if you don't go for transparency, then then you hide stuff, and that's like often that's wanted. That's like the need to know principle in some companies. I only tell you what you need to know. And this is actually just keeping up like my power here with me and not sharing it. So transparency is a very, very important topic, because like for people to take authority and to dare to take authority, they're gonna need like a lot of information to believe in themselves, that they can really like do it, and like trusting yourself, self-confidence that like does not come like with your first decision or whatever. This is also something you have to get used to and get comfortable with. But the good news is like actually we humans are made for that.
Yeah, if you haven't been to the gym for a long time, you haven't been for a run for a while, you're likely going to feel a bit stiff and a bit awkward the first time you go. So you need to kind of get comfortable with it. What you were saying now reminds me actually of a really great quote that I use quite often from Don Reinson. And he says basically that decentralizing authority doesn't only require decentralizing decision making doesn't require only decentralizing the authority. It also requires decentralizing the access to information that is necessary to make good decisions. And just to connect it again, for me, this is a big part of what we're doing with the level 2 board design. We're saying a bunch of teams need to work together to achieve some kind of outcome for the customer. They need to coordinate. Let's make visible what are the other things that are important, and then let the team make those decisions about what's involved. And it's not sort of I saw this a lot of times at companies that are kind of just getting into the space of working with decentralized decision making, is that the management is like, feel like they actually can't step in on anything. And so they end up, as Helen is saying, autonomy without authority is just a vacation. And the challenge basically there is, I think if you end up in that space of just kind of stepping away and saying, oh, well, my team's making all the decisions, they're autonomous, I now don't have to do anything. I don't know. I mean, that's not really the point. Like, you have several things that are still very important to do that we can touch on if it's interesting. But I think the point is that if the teams can make the decisions themselves, and your job is to try to sort of smooth out the access to that information so that people can make those good decisions, very often it's just kind of stuck in your head. And as I said, like before, it's really hard to move forward in your career, or explore a new side project when you're constantly having to ask questions about should we do this thing or should we do that thing. Let's bring together the folks who are doing it already, stick it up on that level 2 system and have a look at it and say, yeah, we need to tackle this technical debt, and we need to make that change, and we need to adopt these metrics, and we need to talk to Alex about this thing. And yeah, those are difficult trade-offs, and let's put it all together and use our collective brain power rather than just talking to one subset of people at a time. And I think it's really, really interesting. Yeah.
And it's about like finding out what really matters, about prioritization. And this is what we're normally really bad in. In companies, normally we try to meet like all demands instead of focusing on the really important work. And to put like that discussion and that dialogue about like what is important on a bigger scale and make it like actually understandable for everyone, that's quite interesting. And then also like, for example, to see like if we like have the goal to create something like autonomous teams or whatever, then to see like, okay, autonomy does not mean independence. So we are still dependent even if we create, for example, autonomous teams. And these autonomous teams, they have dependencies and they have to like organize it somehow. And if we leave that organizing to them and give them like something to visualize and to coordinate all that, then actually then the crowd can do it. If single brains in the management level try to organize that for all others, again, they're going to be the bottleneck.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of interesting kind of open questions sort of in this topic. Siggy was asking something a little bit earlier. He was saying basically that it didn't sound super appealing, this sort of invitation to a lot of people. And I think the challenge is that for a lot of folks is that if part of your sort of sense of self-worth or the way that you're assessed or evaluated within the organization is, Esther was talking about this on the Flight Club a couple of episodes ago, is that we reward people for being decisive. But your question is kind of, I think a better one is to say, well, why? Like, why are we doing this? If we have a good purpose behind something, it doesn't help to be super decisive in ramming your foot on the accelerator and driving the entire company off a cliff. That really just doesn't make so much sense to me. We're trying to go in some kind of a direction. So I think as leaders, if we're not focusing our attention on the day-to-day, can we actually just get the stuff done? But more kind of stepping back and being able to say, well, are we going in the right direction? What should we learn from this? Can we design an environment or modify the environment or work with the folks to support them to be able to create better outcomes rather than just trying to be sort of decisive and directional and exercising authority? I think this is it opens up a whole host of other possibilities for interesting things to learn that certainly I've found quite fascinating on my own personal journey of this. Cool. So we are actually getting quite close to the end of our time. So I want to talk about one or two things very quickly, and then I've got two more interesting, maybe just one actually interesting question for you in order to close off. So the first thing I want to say is just to remind everybody, please, if you enjoyed this session, hit the like button. And of course, if you're enjoying the Flight Clubs in general, hit the subscribe. You'll hear about the future events. And of course, we've mentioned a couple of different things. I think by now, probably most of you have heard something about flight levels and the Flight Club. I will just paste a link in the chat. There is a link here. If you're interested to learn a little bit more about flight levels, we have a very good and quite short introductory course teach you about the fundamentals of flight levels, which could help you maybe to frame some of this thinking about what type of invitations do we need to focus on and how do we make them visible and accessible to everybody. Jump on there, that you can get a 20% discount if you use the discount code that I've included there. Also, this is our last episode for the year. We've had a bunch of really interesting guests, and we're looking forward to what we're going to be doing over the course of the next year. But of course, if you're interested in staying in the loop about what Flight Club is up to, there is the meetup group, which is now linked in the chat as well. And of course, as we were joking earlier, but we are, of course, actually quite serious about it. If you enjoy the Flight Club, please feel free to tell other people about it. The first rule of Flight Club, as we say, is to always talk about Flight Club. So, yeah. Cool. So to wrap up and end off, I want to ask Alex, can you maybe tell us about, if you think back to over the course of your career, something that you learned, maybe a tip or a really powerful insight that really shifted the way you work with this, with invitation, and how would you frame that? Yeah, what is your powerful tip to end the episode?
Yeah, actually, always if I want others to behave differently, then it gets dirty. And then the question is like how to find some other mechanism than using my powers to make them do things that is like concerning other people, other colleagues, my kids, whatever. And then like trying to make it an invitation and saying it's my need, it's my wish or whatever. What do you need to accept an invitation for something or whatever? This is a great step. And this is really hard to be consequent with that.
Cool. I like that. A nice reflective note to end off. Cool. So I think there's actually an issue with my links for some reason. I've posted them again. Hopefully they've come through. If they're not coming through, I will put them in the comments section and in the description if you're interested to have a look. So to end off, Alex, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you as a guest. I've enjoyed not just the conversation this evening, but also the preparation conversations that we've had. And I hope that we will see each other and talk more in the future. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Yes, and to everybody on the live stream, I want to thank you. There's many friendly faces that I recognize both from previous flight clubs, but also from several people that we've worked with, people that we know from the conferences, people from the community, from all over. Thank you so much for supporting us and joining us for these sessions. It really is, you know, we do this because we hope that it's interesting for you and because we enjoy doing this. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic Christmas and New Year, and we will see you in January for our first episodes. Have a fantastic time. Klaus, over to you.
I'm happy. Thank you, Alex, for joining us here. Yeah, Merry Christmas. And what are your famous last words, Alex?
Can you start the music again? I want to dance.
Unfortunately not. I need to fix this.
Okay. I'm going to have my own music and fireworks now. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Merry Christmas, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, music were good. It would be good now. I just hit the finish button. That's totally unromantic, right? But I will hit it now. Cheers.
Yeah.